After 3 months working away, all I wanted was my own bed. But when I unlocked my penthouse door, my daughter-in-law, Serena, was throwing a lavish party, calling me an old pauper, and telling me to get a job. The worst part? She was renting out my home. I stood there, heart pounding, but a calm settled over me. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a declaration of war. Find out what happened next, like share, and let me know where you're listening from. The Miami skyline glittered with 1,000 promises, but all Eleanor Vance wanted was the singular, quiet promise of her own bed. 3 months. 3 grueling months of international consulting, negotiating high-stakes contracts in different time zones, and living out of sterile hotel rooms. Her shoulders ached, her head throbbed with a persistent dull pain, and her soul craved the familiar comfort of her sanctuary on the 42nd floor. As the taxi glided past the palm-lined streets, a wave of relief washed over her. Home. Finally home. The doorman, Miguel, usually greeted her with a warm, genuine smile, a pleasant banter about her travels. Tonight, however, his eyes held a peculiar tension, a fleeting flicker of something that looked suspiciously like pity. His smile was tight, his usual exuberance muted. Eleanor, too tired to dwell on it, simply offered him a weary nod and made her way to the elevator. She dismissed his odd behavior as a trick of her exhaustion, a projection of her own weariness onto a loyal employee. The elevator hummed upwards, a smooth ascent through the opulent tower. With each passing floor, Eleanor felt a lightness return to her spirit. She imagined a long, hot bath, a glass of her favorite Cabernet, in the blissful silence of her meticulously designed penthouse. But as the elevator doors whispered open on the 42nd floor, a jarring cacophony shattered her serene anticipation. Loud, thumping bass music vibrated through the hallway, accompanied by the indistinguishable chatter and laughter of multiple voices. The sound was undeniably coming from her apartment. A cold knot formed in her stomach. Fear, then anger, began to prickle at her skin. She fumbled with her keys, her hand trembling slightly. Was it a mistake? Had she come to the wrong floor? No, this was undoubtedly her door, the custom-made oak panel she'd chosen herself. She inserted the key, turned the lock, and pushed the door open, when the heavy wood swinging inward to reveal a scene that instantly stole her breath and ripped away any lingering calm. Her luxurious living room, usually a haven of quiet elegance, was transformed into a chaotic, pulsating nightclub. Strangers, far too many to count, spilled across her cream-colored sofas, leaned against her polished Art Deco bar, and danced in the center of her Persian rug. Drinks sloshed over the edges of crystal glasses, leaving rings on her valuable mahogany tables. The air was thick with the scent of cheap perfume, stale alcohol, and something vaguely illicit. Her carefully curated sanctuary was desecrated, violated by a horde of uninvited guests. At the epicenter of this swirling vortex of sound and bodies stood Serena Thorne, her daughter-in-law, a crimson beacon in the heart of the chaos. Serena, usually demure and somewhat reserved, now radiated an unbridled confidence, a possessive ease that spoke volumes. She laughed raucously, a full-throated sound Eleanor had rarely heard, her head thrown back, her expensive red cocktail dress clinging to her slender frame. She moved as if she owned the policities, her gestures grand, her smile wide and utterly devoid of care. Then Serena saw her. Her eyes, initially alight with the party's energy, narrowed into sharp slits of recognition, followed by a swift, cutting dismissal. The music, impossibly, seemed to pause for a beat, or perhaps it was just the sudden silence that descended over the immediate vicinity of Serena's voice. "What is that old pauper doing here?" Serena's voice, amplified by the momentary lull and her own sheer audacity, cut through the air like a knife. Her gaze swept over Eleanor, from her travel-worn cashmere coat to her tired face before settling with disdain. "Go get a job." The insult hung in the air, blunt and brutal. The party, which had momentarily muted, now fell completely silent. All eyes, 100 curious, drunken eyes, swiveled from Serena to Eleanor, a collective gasp hanging unspoken. Humiliation, hot and sharp, flared through Eleanor, quickly followed by a cold, searing rage. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden quiet. But years of navigating cutthroat boardrooms had taught her the power of composure. She met Serena's smug gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Serena," she asserted, each word carefully articulated, "this is my apartment." Serena's response was a harsh, cruel laugh that grated on Eleanor's nerves. "Your apartment?" she scoffed, turning to her guests with a theatrical shrug. "Honey, you must be confused. This is a private event. You need to leave." A tall, muscular man who looked far too comfortable in Eleanor's living room stepped forward, his eyes glazed with alcohol. "Yeah, lady," he drawled, gesturing vaguely towards the door. "Private party. You should probably just go." Serena turned her back on Eleanor then, a final, definitive act of dismissal. She waved a perfectly manicured hand, adorned with a diamond ring that Eleanor recognized as a family heirloom, at her confused guests. "Don't worry about her," she announced, her voice pitched to Carrie, dismissing Eleanor as if she were a bothersome fly. "She's just confused. It's her age, you know." The renewed murmur of the partygoers, a mix of awkward laughter and renewed chatter, was like a physical blow. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the injustice pressing down on her, her jaw clenched. This was beyond disrespect. It was a calculated, public humiliation, designed to strip her of her dignity and her home. But a sudden, fierce resolve hardened her spine. She wasn't just confused, she was furious. "Serena," she said, her voice now dangerously low, cutting through the rising din, "I need to speak with you." Alone in the kitchen. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sheer force of her incandescent rage. Serena, after a moment of visible annoyance, finally conceded, her eyes rolling dramatically before she pushed past Eleanor toward the kitchen. The fluorescent lights of the kitchen seemed to amplify the grim reality of the situation. Serena leaned casually against Eleanor's pristine granite countertop, a smirk playing on her lips. "What's the big deal, Eleanor?" she asked, feigning innocence. But her eyes held a predatory gleam. "I've just been using the place. It's been empty for 6 months while you've been gallivanting around the world." The audacity took Eleanor's breath away. 6 months, the exact duration of her most demanding contract abroad. "Daniel gave me a spare key," Serena continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness, her gaze dismissive. "He said you wouldn't mind. You're always so busy with your consulting business." She made Eleanor's successful career sound like a quaint hobby, trivial and unimportant. The blatant lie about Daniel, her own son, twisted the knife deeper. Eleanor could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her son, her gentle Daniel, couldn't possibly have approved of this. "Serena," Eleanor began, her voice strained with disbelief, "how could you possibly think this is acceptable? This is my home. You've taken over my apartment, filled it with strangers, and you have the nerve to tell me Daniel gave you permission?" Serena merely shrugged, a careless, dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. "Look, I'm using it now. You can find somewhere else to spend the night, can't you? I'm sure you have friends." She turned back towards the living room, her implication clear. Eleanor was an inconvenience, an unwelcome interruption to her scheme. As Serena sashayed back into the glittering throng of her party, leaving Eleanor alone in the wreckage of her kitchen, a flash of white caught Eleanor's eye. Taped casually to her state-of-the-art refrigerator, amidst a smattering of smudges and spills, was a small, glossy business card. Her hand reached for it, fingers trembling as she pulled it free. The words leapt out at her, cold and stark against the pristine white. "Serena's Miami Getaway. Luxury accommodations." Starting at 800 below, a phone number, a website, and a picture of what looked suspiciously like her living room, albeit with a different, more generic filter. The horror of the realization hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just using her apartment. It wasn't just a party. Serena wasn't merely occupying her home. She was renting it out. For profit. Her own daughter-in-law was running an illegal, lucrative business out of Eleanor's personal sanctuary, charging strangers exorbitant rates for what she claimed was hers. The humiliation curdled into a hard, cold core of absolute fury. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an act of audacious, criminal theft. The $300 hotel room felt sterile and unwelcoming, a stark contrast to the opulent warmth of her own penthouse, now occupied by an audacious imposter. Eleanor tossed and turned, the crisp white sheets doing little to soothe her agitated mind. Sleep was a distant, unreachable luxury. Every time her eyes drifted closed, Serena's smug face materialized in the darkness, her cruel laugh echoing in the hollow space of the room. The image of the Serena's Miami getaway business card, with its brazen lie and implied theft, was burned into her retina. The sheer audacity of it all was suffocating. How could her own daughter-in-law do something so vile, so openly disrespectful? Dawn finally arrived, painting the sky with muted grays and pinks, but offering no respite. Eleanor felt an exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue, a deep weariness of the soul. There was only one person she could call, one person who might be able to unravel this nightmare. Her son, Daniel. She dialed his number, her fingers stiff. "Mom, good morning." Daniel's voice, cheerful and bright, resonated through the phone, a stark contrast to Eleanor's own agitated state. He sounded completely oblivious, a fact that both comforted and unsettled her. He was still her loving son, untouched by this dark secret, but his ignorance felt like a chasm between them. "Daniel, we need to talk," Eleanor began, trying to keep her voice steady to mask the tremor of anxiety and fury that still simmered beneath the surface. "It's about Serena and my apartment." There was a slight pause on the other end, a flicker of apprehension perhaps, before Daniel responded, "Oh, Mom, what about Serena? Is everything all right? You sound stressed." Eleanor took a deep breath. "No, Daniel, everything is all right. I arrived home last night, and Serena was throwing a massive party in my apartment. Strangers everywhere, and she told me to get out, called me an old pauper." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. "But that's not even the worst part, Daniel. I found a business card on my refrigerator. Serena's Miami getaway. She's been renting out my apartment, Daniel. Your wife is renting out my home." The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken denial. Eleanor could almost hear Daniel processing, then reframing, attempting to fit this shocking revelation into a more palatable narrative. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with a patronizing undertone that cut her deeply. "Mom, slow down. Are you sure you're not just a little tired or stressed from your trip? Maybe you misunderstood. Serena wouldn't do something like that. She probably just had some friends over. You know how she likes to entertain." Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. "I am not confused, Daniel. I am not having some senior moment," she stated firmly, her voice rising with a controlled passion. "I saw the card. I saw the party. Your wife humiliated me in my own home, Daniel. She explicitly told me to leave." Daniel, evidently at work, interjected with a clipped tone. "Mom, look, I'm at the office right now in the middle of something important. I'm sure there's a simple explanation for all of this. Serena probably just thought you wouldn't mind if she used the place for a small gathering while you were away. We'll talk later, okay? Try to relax." And with that, before Eleanor could utter another word, he hung up. The dial tone buzzed in her ear, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed the hollowness in her chest. A profound sense of betrayal washed over Eleanor. Not just from Serena, but from Daniel, her own son. The one person she expected to believe her, to defend her, had dismissed her claims, infantilized her, and cut her off. She felt isolated, adrift in a sea of his denial. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm her. But then, as it always did in her professional life, a fierce, cold resolve hardened within her. If Daniel wouldn't believe her, she would find the undeniable proof that would force him to. She would not be dismissed. She would not be humiliated, not in her own home. Eleanor dressed quickly, a steely determination settling in her gaze. She would not be returning to that hotel room. She had to go back to the building. She had to find answers. Upon arriving at her luxurious high-rise, Eleanor headed straight for the doorman station. Miguel was there, his movements stiff, his face etched with a visible nervousness. He averted her gaze, busying himself with rearranging the stack of newspapers. "Miguel," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm, "we need to talk about Serena and my apartment." Miguel flinched, his shoulders hunching slightly. He hesitated, glancing around the empty lobby as if fearing unseen eavesdroppers. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice barely a whisper, I, I didn't know. Didn't know what, Miguel? Eleanor pressed, her patience wearing thin. He finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. Serena, she's been coming here every weekend, almost, for months. Different people. Sometimes a few, sometimes a big group. She always said it was her place now, that you'd given it to her. Eleanor's blood ran cold every weekend, for months. The brazenness of it was staggering. And what did she tell you? Miguel wrung his hands. She said you were her business partner and that she needed my help with business meetings. She even had me help bring up luggage sometimes. She poed me, said it was from you, a thank you for my discretion. He then pulled out his phone, his thumb nervously scrolling through a log. I kept track, just in case. She gave me $50 each time, said you authorized it. He showed her the screen, a meticulously kept record of dates, time, and the number of guests. The entries stretched back over 6 months, detailing everything from single guests staying for a night to groups of 12 occupying her home for an entire weekend. The sheer volume of transactions was sickening. Then Miguel confessed the most damning detail. And she paid me $200 a month for 6 months for my discretion. She implied that you knew all about it, Ms. Vance, and that you were getting a cut. She made it sound like it was all above board, like a family business. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Serena hadn't just exploited her apartment. She had masterfully manipulated Miguel, turning her trusted employee into an unwitting accomplice, making him believe he was part of some legitimate shared secret. Eleanor reached into her purse, pulling out a wad of cash. She counted out 5 crisp $100 bills. Miguel, she said, her voice devoid of anger, replaced by a chilling calm. I want you to continue tracking everything, every visitor, every interaction. If she uses any documents, any forms, any permits, I want a copy. Keep a detailed log. And this, she pressed the money into his trembling hand, is from me, for your honesty, and for your continued discretion, which from now on will be for me and only for me. Do you understand? Miguel, his eyes wide, nodded vigorously. Yes, Ms. Vance, absolutely. I understand. Eleanor's mind reeled. Serena's manipulative skill was truly terrifying. She hadn't just invaded Eleanor's home. She had poisoned the well, corrupted Miguel, and painted Eleanor as a complicit partner in her own exploitation. The depth of the betrayal was unfathomable, but so was Eleanor's resolve. She would expose Serena, and she would take back what was hers. The day after her confrontation with Serena, fueled by a potent cocktail of anger and disbelief, Eleanor plunged into a meticulous investigation. Her initial stop was the building's management company. Her reputation as a meticulous and formidable resident preceded her, ensuring she was granted an immediate audience with the property manager, a man named Mr. Henderson. His face, usually jovial, was drawn with concern as he listened to Eleanor's account. Ms. Vance, I'm truly sorry to hear this, he began, leafing through a binder. We have very strict policies against unauthorized short-term rentals. It's a huge liability. He paused, then continued, his brow furrowed. However, about 5 months ago, we did receive an inquiry about the short-term rental policies for your unit. The person claimed to be acting on your behalf, a family representative. A cold dread spread through Eleanor. A family representative? Who was it? Mr. Henderson checked his notes. A Mrs. Thorne. She provided what appeared to be a notarized letter of consent, signed by you, granting her permission to explore rental options for your unit while you were abroad, stating you were too busy with your international consulting business. He slid a copy of the document across the polished desk. Eleanor stared at the paper, her blood running cold. The signature, a clumsy imitation of her own elegant script, was undeniably forged. Her hands trembled as she picked up the document. The language, the phrasing, even the notarization seal, all meticulously crafted to appear legitimate. Serena hadn't just lied, she had committed outright forgery. This wasn't merely a breach of trust. It was a criminal act, a felony. The depths of Serena's deception were far more sinister than Eleanor had initially imagined. She spent the rest of the afternoon gathering her thoughts, allowing the chilling implications of the forged document to sink in. That evening, in the quiet solitude of her hotel room, Eleanor methodically logged every discovery. The Serena's Miami getaway business card, now a tangible piece of evidence. Miguel's detailed record of visits and payments, revealing a calculated pattern of exploitation over half a year. And now the forged documentation, an undeniable testament to Serena's criminal intent. Each item was a brick in a wall of proof, a solid foundation for the reckoning to come. As she compiled her notes, one particular detail from Miguel's earlier confession resonated with a profound sense of violation. Serena, in her brazen disregard for truth, had not only claimed Eleanor's apartment as her own, but had actively erased Eleanor from her own life story. She had told guests that Eleanor was just a confused old relative who sometimes showed up unexpectedly. The words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. She hadn't just stolen her apartment. She had stolen her identity, her dignity, reduced her to a pathetic, senile nuisance in her own home. The humiliation was a raw, burning wound. This wasn't something she could handle alone. This required professional expertise. Eleanor reached for her phone and dialed a familiar number. Brenda Hayes, a seasoned private investigator Eleanor had employed on intricate business matters in the past, answered on the second ring. Brenda was known for her discretion, her tenacity, and her uncanny ability to unearth hidden truths. "Brenda, it's Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I have a situation, a very serious one." Eleanor recounted the entire sordid tale, from her arrival to the forged documents. Brenda listened patiently, interjecting only with precise, clarifying questions. When Eleanor finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "Eleanor," Brenda's voice was calm, yet laced with a professional gravity. "What you've described is textbook identity theft and fraud, potentially grand theft given the duration and the apparent scope of the operation. This isn't just a family dispute, it's a criminal enterprise." "I understand that," Eleanor replied, relief washing over her that Brenda understood the severity. "And I want a full private investigation. I want every lie, every dollar, every single person Serena has deceived documented. I want a watertight case, Brenda. No stone left unturned." "Consider it done," Brenda assured her. "We'll start immediately. I'll need copies of all the documentation you have, and I'll interview Miguel. We'll also need to get legal counsel involved. But for now, let's focus on gathering ironclad evidence." After the call with Brenda, a new thought struck Eleanor. In this digital age, deception rarely remained confined to paper trails. She logged into her various social media accounts, a grim premonition settling in her gut. She started with Instagram, typing Serena's Miami getaway into the search bar. The results were instantaneous and sickening. Dozens of photos, vibrant and professionally shot, showcased her living room, her kitchen, even her master bedroom. Each image was carefully curated, bathed in flattering light, and tagged with the offending business name. She moved to Facebook and then, with a growing sense of dread, to Airbnb. The listings were there too, full-blown advertisements for Serena's Miami getaway. The descriptions were elaborate fabrications, boasting about inherited beachfront property, a family's long history in Miami real estate, and a legacy of luxury living passed down through generations. Serena had woven a complete fantasy, positioning herself as the scion of a wealthy Miami family, offering exclusive access to her opulent ancestral home. Eleanor scrolled through the guest reviews, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. "Serena has impeccable taste," one review gushed. "The apartment is divine, just what you'd expect from old Miami money." Another praised her family's obvious wealth and generosity. Then she found it, a particularly cutting review, left by a guest who had evidently been present during her own disastrous arrival. "Great place, though we did have an unexpected visit from a rather confused older woman," it read, followed by a laughing emoji. "Serena handled it like a pro, though. Said she was just a distant relative who sometimes forgot where she lived. We all had a good laugh. The laughter, the casual mockery, the public humiliation. It was all laid bare for strangers to consume and find entertaining." Eleanor's initial anger transformed into a cold, consuming rage. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about her reputation, her identity, her very being. Serena hadn't just taken her home, she had attempted to erase Eleanor's existence, replacing it with a fabricated narrative of her own. Eleanor vowed then and there that Serena would pay dearly for every single lie, every stolen dollar, and every laugh at her expense. Brenda Hayes' call came precisely 48 hours after Eleanor had initiated the investigation. Eleanor answered with a tense anticipation, her heart thrumming a frantic rhythm. Brenda's voice, usually a calm, steady presence, now carried a subtle edge of professional disgust, a rare crack in her composed demeanor. "Eleanor," Brenda began without preamble, "my initial findings are disturbing. This operation of Serena's is far more extensive than we initially imagined. It has been running for exactly 6 months and 2 weeks." Eleanor felt a cold dread creep up her spine. 6 months and 2 weeks. That was the entire duration of her absence, her most demanding international contract. Serena had wasted no time. "How extensive?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight. "She's actively using 4 different rental platforms," Brenda explained. "Not just the one you found. Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, and a few smaller local ones. Her rates vary, but she consistently charges between $800 and $1,500 per weekend, sometimes more depending on events in the city." Eleanor's mind, accustomed to rapid financial calculations, whirred into action. 4 platforms, charging upwards of $800 a weekend for 6 months. Even if she was only renting it out every other weekend, that still amounted to at least 12 weekends. At a conservative average of $1,050 per rental, Serena had made at least $15,000, perhaps more using Eleanor's apartment, Eleanor's designer furniture, Eleanor's utilities, and Eleanor's good name. The sheer scale of the theft was staggering. "And she's quite the storyteller," Brenda continued, a dry note in her voice. "She cycles through different narratives for her guests, adapting them to the platform or the client profile. Sometimes it's her family's inherited beachfront property. Other times it's a luxury condo gifted by her incredibly generous in-laws for their tireless work in the community. The common thread is always some form of fabricated legacy or inherited wealth, often attributing it to Daniel's family." Eleanor felt a fresh wave of revulsion. Serena wasn't just stealing from her. She was twisting Eleanor's hard-earned success, her meticulous curation of her home, and attributing it to a fictional legacy. She was using Eleanor's very identity, her established position, to legitimize her own web of lies and profit from it. The audacity was breathtaking. "Brenda, what are the legal implications of all of this?" Eleanor asked, her voice betraying the tremor of suppressed anger. "Legally, she's looking at multiple counts of fraud," Brenda recited, ticking them off. "Theft of services, your utilities, your property maintenance, and then, of course, the forged documentation you found with the building management. That's a definite felony in Florida. It's serious, Eleanor. We could move on this very quickly." Eleanor absorbed this information, weighing the immediate satisfaction of action against the deeper, more strategic need for a comprehensive response. But before she could articulate her next instruction, Brenda dropped a bombshell that shattered Eleanor's fragile composure. "And there's something else, Eleanor, something far more sinister." Brenda paused as if bracing herself for Eleanor's reaction. "Serena has been researching divorce attorneys." Eleanor felt the world tilt on its axis. "What?" she choked out, the word barely a whisper. The blood drained from her face, leaving her feeling lightheaded. "Specifically," Brenda elaborated, "she's been researching Florida divorce laws, particularly concerning assets acquired before marriage. She's looking into what constitutes marital property and how assets are divided." Eleanor's mind raced, connecting the terrifying dots. The meticulous documentation of her property, the public declarations of ownership, the consistent establishment of herself as the property manager in online listings. It clicked into place with a sickening thud. Serena wasn't just making a quick buck. She wasn't just committing fraud. She was playing a long game, a calculated predatory scheme. "She's also been researching your business, Eleanor," Brenda added, the casual tone of the revelation belied by its chilling implication. "Your assets, your financial situation. It's all part of a very deliberate pattern." Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Serena planned to divorce Daniel, and then, using her fabricated history of managing the apartment, using the forged documents and the public online presence. She would attempt to claim Eleanor's penthouse as marital property. She was building a case, not just to profit from the apartment, but to legally wrest ownership from Eleanor, to steal it outright from her son. The thought was so vile, so utterly depraved, that Eleanor had to lean against the wall to steady herself. She's attempting to establish a history of contribution to the property, Brenda explained, her voice grave. By acting as the de facto property manager, by publicly declaring it as her property, and by even potentially implying she put her own money and effort into its upkeep, she's laying the groundwork to argue for a significant stake in it during a divorce settlement. It's a classic move in high-asset divorces where one spouse attempts to claim premarital property. The sophistication of Serena's plan was breathtaking in its ruthlessness. This wasn't the impulsive act of a greedy individual. This was the carefully orchestrated machination of a professional manipulator. She was not just stealing income, she was attempting to steal an entire legacy. She was not just committing fraud. She was laying a legal foundation to steal even more, to dismantle Eleanor's life and enrich herself. Brenda, Eleanor said, her voice now cold and steel-edged, the nausea replaced by a chilling resolve. I want you to document everything, every single detail. But I want this investigation to remain absolutely secret. Serena cannot know we are onto her. Not yet. Understood, Brenda replied, recognizing the shift in Eleanor's tone. We'll proceed with extreme caution and discretion. Eleanor hung up the phone, her mind racing. An immediate legal confrontation would be too simple, too direct. It would play into Serena's narrative, making Eleanor look like the vindictive mother-in-law, a caricature of a woman whose confusion had finally boiled over. No, Serena had meticulously built her web of lies, and now Eleanor would ensure that Serena herself became entangled in it. I want to let her hang herself, Eleanor murmured to the empty hotel room, a dark promise hardening in her heart. She would wait, she would watch, and when the time was right, she would pull the rug out from under Serena with devastating precision. The game was on, and Eleanor was ready to play. The thrill of the hunt, combined with the cold fire of her resolve, replaced the lingering hurt. Don't miss a single step of how I built this trap. Like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you can witness every moment of Serena's downfall. With Brenda Hayes diligently building the evidence against Serena, Eleanor focused on setting a trap that would ensnare her daughter-in-law beyond any doubt. Her strategy was simple: allow Serena to continue her charade, but ensure every step she took was meticulously documented and, ideally, self-incriminating. Her first move was to contact the building's management company once more, this time requesting comprehensive records. She asked for detailed reports of all service calls, maintenance requests, and, crucially, utility usage for her unit over the past 6 months. The documents arrived promptly, and as Eleanor sifted through the data, a clear, damning pattern emerged. Massive spikes in water, electricity, and internet usage correlated precisely with the weekends she had been away. The very weekends Miguel had logged Serena's illicit rentals. The proof was undeniable. Serena was not only profiting from Eleanor's property, but was also bleeding her dry on utility costs. Next, Eleanor initiated a series of strategic installations. She arranged for a discreet, highly reputable security firm to install new smart locks on her apartment door. These weren't just for security, they were sophisticated logging devices, programmed to record every single entry and exit, sending real-time alerts directly to Eleanor's phone. Critically, she did not immediately change the existing access codes. Serena, still believing herself to be in control, would continue to use the keys she'd obtained from Daniel or any codes she might have learned, inadvertently providing Eleanor with an unassailable digital log of her movements. Alongside the smart locks, a comprehensive security system was installed. Sleek, modern cameras, clearly visible yet unobtrusive, were strategically placed in every common area of her apartment: the living room, dining area, kitchen, and hallway. Explicit signage, small but legible, was placed near the entrance and within the common areas, notifying anyone entering that the premises were under video surveillance. Eleanor made sure every aspect was above board, ensuring the recordings would be legally admissible, leaving no room for Serena to claim ignorance or invasion of privacy. Anyone entering her home would knowingly be recorded. The most ingenious part of Eleanor's trap involved the apartment's services. She contacted her internet provider, cable company, and even the building's internal service department. Eleanor meticulously reconfigured her automatic payment system with a cunning twist. All services to her apartment would be automatically suspended every Friday evening at 5:00 p.m. and automatically restored every Monday morning at 9:00 a.m. This calculated disruption would force Serena, as the self-proclaimed property manager, to contact the service providers directly to restore them. Each frustrated call, each panicky email, each service request would create an irrefutable paper trail, further solidifying her unauthorized management of the property. The first test of her elaborate trap came swiftly. It was a Friday afternoon, a little past 4:00 p.m. Eleanor's phone buzzed, an alert from her security system. Main door open. User, Serena Thorne. The accompanying video feed showed Serena entering the apartment, struggling with two large suitcases and a box of what looked like catering supplies. An hour later, her phone buzzed again. Main door opened. 5 more people entered, laughing, clearly guests arriving for another Serena's Miami getaway weekend. Eleanor watched, a grim satisfaction settling in her chest. The bait had been taken. At precisely 6:00 p.m., Eleanor's phone remained silent. No alert for internet restoration. Then, at 6:50 a.m., another alert confirmed the cable TV also remained off. The trap was sprung. Not long after, at 7:00 p.m., her phone rang. It was Miguel, the doorman. His voice was laced with an undeniable mix of panic and sympathy. "Miss Vance," he whispered. "Serena is very upset. The internet and cable are both out. She's called the service providers, but they said they need your authorization as the account holder. She asked me to call you to see if you can do anything." Eleanor, maintaining calm she didn't entirely feel, feigned ignorance perfectly. "Oh, Miguel, really? How strange. I just got back from a really grueling week, so I haven't even checked on things myself. You know how these older buildings can be with their wiring. Sometimes things just go out." She sighed, a convincing act of weary resignation. "Tell Serena I'll look into it first thing Monday morning. I'm just too exhausted to deal with it tonight. She'll just have to make do." Over the course of that weekend, Eleanor's phone became a relentless messenger of Serena's mounting frustration. She received no fewer than 12 additional entry alerts from the smart lock system, each one signaling the arrival of another bewildered and increasingly annoyed guest who was greeted not by luxury, but by silence and a blank television screen. The security cameras, recording diligently, captured everything. Eleanor watched Serena frantically pacing the living room, her phone pressed to her ear, arguing with unresponsive customer service representatives. She saw her attempting to placate irate guests who had paid top dollar for a luxury experience, now devoid of basic amenities. Heated conversations, annoyed gestures, and exasperated sighs were all meticulously documented. The footage showcased Serena in full property manager mode, desperately trying to manage a crisis of her own making, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was actively running an unauthorized business out of Eleanor's apartment, all while unknowingly providing Eleanor with an unassailable record of her actions. The trap had not only sprung, it was delivering a treasure trove of evidence. By Sunday afternoon, the weekend's chaos in Eleanor's apartment reached a predictable climax. 3 of the rented couples, thoroughly disgruntled by the lack of internet and entertainment, had packed up and left early, demanding partial refunds from a visibly exasperated Serena. Eleanor, miles away in her temporary hotel room, watched the drama unfold on her security footage, a grim satisfaction coiling in her gut. Serena, dressed in a silk robe Eleanor vaguely recognized as her own, paced the living room like a caged animal, her phone glued to her ear, her face a mask of furious frustration. The luxury getaway had crumbled into a farcical nightmare for her paying guests. Come Monday morning, as if by magic, the internet and cable services in Eleanor's penthouse seamlessly restored themselves at precisely 9:00 a.m. Eleanor received a text from Miguel later that day. Serena had called him, profusely thanking him for fixing everything, in expressing her relief. She even added casually that she really needed to be more careful about checking maintenance schedules in future, unknowingly creating yet another piece of damning evidence of her unauthorized property management. Eleanor smiled faintly. The trap was working beautifully. For the next 3 weeks, Eleanor meticulously repeated the pattern. Every Friday evening at 5:00 the services would mysteriously cut out. Every Monday morning at 9 a.m. they would return. And every single week, Serena, oblivious to the meticulously orchestrated sabotage, would scramble. Eleanor's phone would ping with alerts of Serena's frantic phone calls to service providers, her exasperated texts to Miguel, her increasingly desperate voicemails left for her business partner, all documented proof of her ongoing, unauthorized operation in an apartment she had no legal right to manage. But the security footage was proving to be even more revelatory, painting a comprehensive picture of Serena's brazen entitlement. Eleanor watched, her heart a cold stone in her chest, as Serena led new sets of guests on grand tours of the Penthouse. Serena pointed out her artwork, claiming provenance for pieces Eleanor had collected over decades. She gestured at Eleanor's antique furniture, describing them as family heirlooms. She even showcased Eleanor's meticulously designed decorative touches, accepting compliments as if the entire aesthetic was her own creation. One particularly disturbing video showed Serena, mid-tour, flinging open the doors to Eleanor's spacious walk-in closet. With a flourish, she presented Eleanor's carefully curated wardrobe, her expensive designer shoes, and her collection of handbag as if they were all hers, part of the luxury lifestyle she was offering. The invasion of privacy was chilling. Most shockingly, on several occasions, Eleanor witnessed Serena wearing some of her own jewelry. A delicate pearl necklace that had been a gift from Daniel, a distinctive amethyst pendant Eleanor wore for special occasions. Serena sported them casually, accessorizing her hostess outfits, further blurring the lines between what was hers and what was Eleanor's, making a mockery of their personal significance. The most damning piece of footage, however, arrived in week 4. Serena was on the phone, visibly agitated, pacing the living room. As she spoke, her gaze drifted, then settled, locking onto a framed photograph displayed on a side table. It was a cherished image of Daniel and Eleanor, beaming with pride at Daniel's college graduation. Serena stared at it, a strange, calculating expression on her face, as if she were dissecting it, looking for flaws, for weaknesses. She spoke into the phone, her voice hushed, too low for the camera's microphone to pick up the exact words, but her intent was clear in her intense, predatory stare. In that moment, a chilling realization hit Eleanor. Serena wasn't just researching divorce law to stake a claim on her assets. She was studying me, Eleanor thought, a cold dread seeping into her bones, learning about my life, my history with Daniel, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. Serena wasn't just after money, she was after control, aiming to dismantle Eleanor's entire reality. Brenda Hayes continued to call twice a week, her updates adding new, darker layers to Serena's deception. She had uncovered fake social media profiles, meticulously created by Serena, solely for the purpose of posting glowing, 5-star reviews for Serena's Miami getaway. She had also learned that Serena was consistently telling her regular guests that Eleanor was a senile relative who occasionally showed up unexpectedly and, more importantly, should be ignored. The insidious narrative of Eleanor's supposed mental decline was being propagated not just verbally, but now being confirmed by public online reviews. But then came the most disturbing revelation of all. Brenda informed Eleanor that Serena had been actively researching Eleanor's health. She had managed to call Eleanor's doctor's office, posing as a concerned relative, asking highly specific questions about Eleanor's memory, her cognitive functions, and general symptoms related to dementia or Alzheimer's. Eleanor felt a jolt of pure horror. Serena wasn't just trying to steal her apartment. She was building a case to have Eleanor declared incompetent, to strip her of her legal autonomy, her very sanity. The thought was sickening. It was a calculated, heinous attempt to invalidate Eleanor's testimony, to silence her, and to ultimately gain complete control over her life and assets. The risks were escalating. Serena was not just greedy, she was dangerous. Every fiber of Eleanor's being screamed for immediate action, to expose Serena right then and there. but a deeper, more strategic voice prevailed. Daniel, her son, had already dismissed her initial claims. He needed undeniable proof, something so egregious that he couldn't possibly rationalize it away. She needed Serena to make one more mistake, Eleanor decided, her gaze hardening on the silent, insidious footage. A big one, something so obvious that even Daniel can't ignore it. She would wait. The trap was sprung, the net was closing, and now Eleanor just needed to reel in the final biggest catch. Eleanor knew the time was ripe. Serena had been sufficiently lulled into a false sense of security, believing her elaborate charade was still intact. It was time to spring the ultimate trap. Eleanor sent Daniel a carefully worded text message, crafting it with precision to sound casual, unassuming, yet undeniably urgent. Hi, Daniel. Hope you're having a good week. I've been having some persistent problems with the apartment in Miami. Technical issues mostly. Internet and cable keep cutting out. Would you mind terribly checking on things this weekend? I know you're busy, but I'd really appreciate it. Daniel's response was almost immediate. Hey, Mom. Funny you should ask. Serena and I were actually planning to spend the weekend down there anyway. Great timing. We'll be happy to check on everything for you. Eleanor read the text, a flicker of surprise mixed with a surge of anticipation. Serena and Daniel were planning a weekend there. Serena must have had a rental booked and had likely convinced Daniel it was for them to get away. The lie was so embedded she didn't even flinch. This was even better than Eleanor had hoped. Friday morning, Eleanor was in her Chicago office, but her focus was entirely on the live security feed from her Miami penthouse. At 11:45 a.m., an alert chimed on her phone. Main door opened. User, Serena Thorne. Serena entered alone 2 hours earlier than Daniel had indicated they would arrive. Eleanor watched, a hawk observing its prey. Serena moved with practiced efficiency, checking the rooms, adjusting a cushion here, straightening a throw blanket there, even changing the sheets on the master bed. She was preparing for guests. At 12:15 p.m., Serena received a phone call. Eleanor watched as Serena's posture stiffened. She began to pace frantically, her hand running through her hair, her face a mask of escalating panic. She then made several other agitated calls, her voice hushed, her gestures increasingly desperate. Something had gone wrong with her weekend plans. By 1:00 p.m., Serena was in a flurry of activity, packing everything up. The catering supplies, the fresh linens, the personal items she had brought to stage the apartment as hers. By 1:30 p.m., she was gone, leaving Eleanor's apartment looking pristine, exactly as she had found it. 20 minutes later, Daniel called Eleanor, his voice tinged with disappointment. Mom, I'm so sorry, but we had to cancel the Miami trip. Serena is not feeling well at all. She's got one of her severe migraines. Eleanor feigned sympathy, her voice a soothing balm. Oh, Daniel, darling, I'm so sorry to hear that. Is she all right? I didn't even know she suffered from migraines. Yeah, apparently she's been seeing a doctor about them, Daniel said, a hint of confusion in his voice. This is news to me too, to be honest, but she's really out of it. Well, that's just awful, Eleanor replied, her mind racing. But listen, since you were already planning to go, why don't you still head down just for Saturday? You could check on those technical problems for me with me. You know how frustrating it is when the internet goes out. You could still enjoy a quiet day by the pool, maybe. Daniel hesitated. I don't know, Mom. I feel bad leaving Serena. Nonsense, Eleanor pressed gently. She'll be resting. You're not abandoning her. You're helping your mother. Just for one day, sweetie, I'd feel so much better knowing someone's checked on things. After a moment, Daniel agreed. All right, Mom, you're right. I'll go down by myself tomorrow morning, just for the day. Make sure everything's working. Eleanor hung up, her pulse quickening. This was even better than her original plan. Daniel, alone in the apartment, with all her hidden cameras and silent witnesses. The potential for discovery was immense. But an hour later, Daniel called back, his voice thick with frustration. Mom, you won't believe this. Serena is feeling much better suddenly. Says her migraine just vanished. And now she's insisting on coming with me to Miami. She says she's worried about you and wants to make sure I relay the apartment details accurately. Eleanor instantly recognized Serena's smooth manipulation. She hadn't miraculously recovered. She was terrified of Daniel being alone in the apartment, of him stumbling upon some lingering piece of evidence that would expose her. Serena was a master at damage control, always a step ahead, or so she thought. "Oh, that's wonderful news that she's feeling better," Eleanor said, feigning relief. "Well, that's very thoughtful of her, darling. Tell her I appreciate her concern." Inside, a cold fury mixed with grudging admiration for Serena's quick thinking. The trap had to be adjusted, but the bait was still firmly taken. Saturday morning at 7:30 a.m., Eleanor's security system pinged. Service entrance opened. User, Serena Thorne. Serena was entering through the discreet service entrance, not the main lobby, carrying a large, suspiciously full duffel bag. She moved with the stealth of a burglar, her eyes darting around, not towards the visible cameras, but towards the usual entry points, clearly paranoid. For the next 3 hours, Eleanor watched a frantic spectacle. Serena, oblivious to the omniscient gaze of the security cameras, tore through the apartment like a hurricane. She stripped beds, shoving rented linens into the duffel bag. She rifled through drawers, pulling out every stray Serena's Miami Getaway business card, tearing them into tiny pieces and flushing them down the toilet. She wiped down surfaces with a vengeance, removing every fingerprint, every trace of previous guests. She rearranged furniture, attempting to restore the apartment to its untouched, Eleanor-approved state. She was systematically erasing all evidence of her illicit business, a one-woman cleanup crew in a frantic attempt to hide her tracks. By the time Daniel arrived at noon, whistling as he entered through the main door, the apartment looked pristine. It was exactly as Eleanor had left it, a perfect tableau of her elegant, untouched home. Serena, pale and slightly breathless, greeted him with a wide, innocent smile, claiming her rapid recovery was a miracle. But what Serena didn't know, what she had utterly forgotten in her panicked rush to erase her tracks, was that the security cameras had documented every single incriminating move, every desperate act of concealment in high definition. The footage was irrefutable. The trap was finally complete, the evidence secured. Daniel's visit to the Miami penthouse was, from Eleanor's perspective watching the security feed in Chicago, largely uneventful. He dutifully checked the internet router, tested the cable television, ran the AC, and flushed the toilets, finding everything working perfectly. Later, he sent Eleanor a text. "Everything looks great, Mom. No technical problems at all." Yet even through the impersonal lens of the camera, Eleanor could discern a subtle disquiet in Daniel's demeanor. His body language betrayed a nagging suspicion. He paused in various spots around the living room, his gaze lingering as if searching for something out of place. He would occasionally turn to Serena, his eyes filled with unspoken questions, a slight furrow in his brow. At one point, Eleanor watched him ask Serena something that made her stiffen visibly, her jaw tightening. Serena responded animatedly, her hands gesturing defensively, pointing around the apartment, her words too muffled for the camera's microphone to pick up. Daniel listened, a skeptical expression settling on his face, but ultimately, he seemed to let it go, for now. They left Sunday evening, but before their departure, Serena undertook one final, methodical sweep of the apartment. She was performing one last check, ensuring no trace of her illicit activities remained. As she moved through the living room, her eyes, sharper now with a lingering paranoia, finally landed on the small, discreet security camera nestled on a bookshelf. Her face, previously composed, drained of all color. Her mouth opened in a silent gasp of pure, unadulterated panic. She looked directly into the lens, her eyes wide with dawning horror, a clear realization etched into her features. She had been caught. The moment was chilling, a silent confession captured in high definition. Monday morning, Eleanor received an unexpected call. It was Amanda from Elite Events, a high-end catering company. "Ms. Vance, I'm calling about the $450 cancellation fee for the cocktail party scheduled at your Miami penthouse this past weekend. We received a frantic call to cancel on Friday afternoon, but unfortunately our policy states—" Eleanor cut her off, her voice calm. "Amanda, I'm afraid there's been a mistake. I didn't order any catering, nor did I authorize anyone to do so for my apartment." Amanda paused, clearly flustered. "But the contract was signed by a Mrs. T. Patterson, who identified herself as property manager, and she provided your contact number." She explicitly stated she was acting on your behalf for a client event. The name T. Patterson was a new, audacious alias. Serena was digging herself deeper. Eleanor assured Amanda she would look into it and hung up, a fresh piece of evidence now added to her growing dossier. Later that same Monday, Brenda called with an urgent update, her voice tight with concern. Eleanor, things are escalating. Serena has made 3 different calls to divorce attorneys this morning alone and has scheduled initial consultations. Her timeline has definitely accelerated since Daniel's trip. That's not all, Brenda continued, her tone grave. She also hauled 2 different moving companies for estimates for relocating within Miami, and she made an appointment with a real estate appraiser for your unit. She's moving ahead with her plan to claim your apartment. Eleanor listened, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. It was all falling into place, a horrifying puzzle. And there's one more thing, Eleanor, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The most chilling discovery yet. Serena has been researching elder care facilities, specifically facilities specializing in memory problems and dementia care. The air in Eleanor's office seemed to grow impossibly heavy. The final horrifying piece of Serena's intricate puzzle clicked into place. She wasn't just trying to claim the apartment through divorce or fraud. Her ultimate plan was far more insidious, more cruel. Serena intended to declare Eleanor incompetent, to have her deemed mentally unfit, thereby gaining legal guardianship over her assets. With Eleanor out of the way, deemed unable to manage her own affairs, Serena could then freely take control of the penthouse, sell it, or continue to exploit it for profit, all under the guise of caring for a confused elderly relative. Eleanor, Brenda's voice was sharp with urgency, pulling her back from the abyss of the realization. If Serena can get a doctor to testify, even deceptively, and present herself as a concerned family member with witnesses to your alleged confusion, competency proceedings can move very quickly, especially if you don't have immediate legal or family support to counter it. This is incredibly dangerous. The risk was monumental. Serena was not merely a con artist, she was a predator, utterly devoid of conscience. Every instinct screamed for immediate action. But Eleanor had seen the fear in Serena's eyes when she spotted the camera. She knew Serena believed she was cornered, that her carefully constructed world was crumbling. This was the moment for Eleanor's final, most audacious play. Brenda, Eleanor said, her voice calm, devoid of the fear she felt. I need you to arrange a family dinner for next weekend, at Daniel's house, and I want Serena to believe she's winning. I'm going to give her exactly what she wants. Brenda hesitated. Eleanor, what are you planning? I'm going to act confused, Brenda, Eleanor explained, a steely glint in her eyes. I'm going to play the senile relative Serena has painted me to be. I'm going to let her feel overconfident, let her think she's successfully manipulated Daniel and is about to win. Then, when she's at her most smug, her most victorious, I'm going to show Daniel the security footage. All of it. The plan was risky, a tightrope walk over a chasm of emotional devastation. But it was the only way to ensure Daniel saw Serena for what she truly was, without any doubt, without any room for denial. It was time for the unveiling. The stage was set for Saturday evening at Eleanor's elegant Chicago apartment. Not Daniel's home, a subtle alteration that placed Eleanor firmly in control of her own space. She had prepared a simple but exquisite meal, the aromas of roasted chicken and fresh herbs filling the air, a stark contrast to the emotional maelstrom brewing beneath the surface. This would be the most important performance of her life. Daniel arrived first, his brow furrowed with a concern. Mom, your call earlier was a little strange. You sound a bit off. Are you really okay? Eleanor nodded slowly, allowing a touch more fragility and uncertainty to creep into her demeanor, a slight hesitation in her movements. She needed him to be worried, to be watchful. A few minutes later, Serena swept in, her eyes immediately scrutinizing Eleanor for any definitive signs of mental decline. When she found none immediately apparent, she overcompensated with exaggerated warmth, embracing Eleanor tightly. Eleanor, darling, how are you feeling? Daniel told me you weren't quite yourself. Eleanor sighed dramatically, her gaze unfocused. Oh, just silly things. I keep misplacing my keys, and I swear I locked the door before I left yesterday. But I found it ajar this morning, and the electric bills, so confusing lately. She watched Serena's eyes, noting the telltale flicker of interest, the subtle tightening of her lips into a barely concealed smile. The bait was being nibbled. Daniel expressed genuine concern. "Mom, maybe you should see a doctor." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, darling. Just a bit of age, that's all. Now, Serena, dear, would you mind giving me a hand in the kitchen? My memory for where things are kept seems to be playing tricks on me tonight." She observed Serena's barely contained excitement, the eagerness to step into a position of control. In the kitchen, Serena, ever the feigned concerned party, leaned in conspiratorially. "Eleanor, seriously, have you seen a doctor? Your health insurance from your consulting business would cover it, wouldn't it?" She was probing, trying to gauge Eleanor's financial stability, reminding her of the very business Serena was attempting to undermine. Eleanor pretended a deeper confusion, her voice trailing off. "My business. Oh yes. Sometimes I forget that I still have that. It's been so quiet lately." She let the words hang, implying a decline in her professional life, a weakening of her financial fortress. This was the core of the bait, painting a picture of a vulnerable, financially unstable Eleanor, ripe for exploitation. She knew this would accelerate Serena's timeline. Eleanor then turned to Serena, her voice dropping to a confiding tone. "You know, Serena, with my confusion and the business being so quiet, I've been thinking, perhaps it's time to simplify. You're so sharp, dear. Do you know anything about managing properties? I've even been considering selling the Miami apartment." The hook was set. Serena's eyes lit up, a predatory gleam flashing in their depths. "Oh, Eleanor, really? Why, as a matter of fact, I've been learning so much about real estate investments lately. It's a fascinating market. I'd be absolutely delighted to help you. Perhaps we should take a trip down to Miami soon, just to assess things." Her smile was saccharine, dripping with false helpfulness. Daniel, who had just walked into the kitchen, overheard the last part. "A trip to Miami? That sounds wonderful," he exclaimed, a genuine smile on his face. "A family vacation. We could all go next weekend." Eleanor's heart gave a triumphant lurch. Daniel would be there. He would witness Serena's next decisive move. During dinner, Serena, emboldened by Eleanor's apparent decline in Daniel's enthusiasm, made several crucial slips. She recounted an anecdote about a specific South Beach restaurant she had visited recently, a place Eleanor knew was a hotspot for tourists renting luxury apartments. She spoke with suspiciously detailed knowledge of the building's rental market, casually mentioning typical weekend rates and peak season occupancy as if she were a seasoned real estate agent. Daniel glanced at her, a flicker of unease in his eyes, but said nothing. As they began clearing the table, preparing to leave, Daniel pulled Eleanor aside. "Mom," he murmured, his voice low with concern, "I don't want to worry you, but some things at the Miami apartment just seemed off, like the furniture had been moved around and the fridge was completely empty. It just didn't feel quite like your place." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes wide, feigning a fresh wave of confusion. "Oh, really, Daniel? Moved? Empty? Oh, dear. Do you think someone might have been using it?" The implication hung heavy in the air. At that precise moment, Serena returned from the bathroom, catching the tail end of their conversation. Her eyes narrowed, but her quick mind immediately registered the danger. She stepped forward, her voice falsely bright. "Oh, that's perfectly normal, Daniel. When a building is as prestigious as Eleanor's, they often have property managers who check on things, or even use units for their own guests. It's a legitimate reason for people to have access." She shot a reassuring yet subtly menacing glance at Eleanor. Eleanor turned to Serena, her voice chillingly precise, every trace of confusion gone. Her eyes were sharp, unblinking. "Serena," she asked, each word a hammer blow, "how do you know my building uses a property management company?" Serena froze, her composure shattered. The blood drained from her face and her mouth fell open. She stammered, her facade crumbling completely. I just assumed it's common practice in luxury buildings." Her voice died, her eyes wide with terror, as she realized her monumental mistake. "We will go to Miami this weekend," Eleanor declared, her voice firm and resolute, cutting through the stunned silence. "And we will investigate these technical problems in this property management thoroughly." Serena's panic was palpable. She spun on Daniel, her voice shrill. Daniel, don't listen to her. She's clearly confused. These are just paranoid thoughts. Her memory problems are getting worse. We need to get her help. She was desperate, attempting to use Eleanor's staged fragility against her, but it was too late. Eleanor calmly walked to her laptop, which she had strategically left open on the coffee table. She pulled up the security system app, the live feed of her Miami apartment now prominently displayed. I installed cameras in my Miami apartment, Daniel, she stated, her voice steady and clear, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Daniel stared at the screen and back at his wife, his face a mask of dawning horror. Eleanor tapped a button and the damning footage began to play. Serena's rental operation, her lies to guests, her wearing Eleanor's jewelry, her frantic cleaning, and finally her panicked discovery of the cameras. Every single act of betrayal, every calculating move, every single piece of deceit laid bare in high definition. Daniel watched, his face contorting from disbelief to white-hot rage. He looked at Serena, then at the screen, then back at Serena. His eyes, when they finally settled on his wife, were filled with a fury Eleanor had rarely witnessed. "Get out," he snarled, his voice low and guttural. "Get out of my house. Get out of our life." Absent, Serena's mask completely slipped, her face contorted into a sneer of pure contempt. "You ungrateful old hag," she spat at Eleanor, her voice venomous. "You were just going to let that apartment rot while I could make a fortune. You deserve to be in a home." She stormed out, a whirlwind of defeated fury, leaving behind a silence so profound it was deafening. Daniel collapsed onto a chair, burying his face in his hands, trembling with a mixture of shock, grief, and profound shame. "Mom, so I am," he choked out, his voice thick with tears. "I am so sorry. I should have listened to you, Bishka. How could I have been so blind?" Eleanor sat beside him, gently rubbing his back. "It's not your fault, Daniel. She's a master manipulator. She played a very long game, and she played it well." She explained Serena's full, sinister plan, the divorce, the attempt to claim the apartment, the research into elder care facilities, the ultimate goal of declaring Eleanor incompetent. As the full scope of Serena's treachery became clear, Daniel's shame turned to a cold, hard resolve. 3 months later, Eleanor and Daniel stood together on the balcony of the Miami apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. The space felt clean again, purged of the deceit. Serena had faced charges of fraud and forgery, resulting in restitution payments and a lengthy probation. The divorce from Daniel had been finalized quickly, and Eleanor had, of course, retained full ownership of her penthouse. Daniel, finally able to articulate the weight that had been lifted, reflected on the past. "I missed so many signs, Mom. I regret not trusting you sooner." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a new depth of understanding and admiration. "But you were incredible. You handled it with such strength and dignity. I've always been proud of you, but now I truly see how formidable you are." Eleanor smiled, a sense of complete freedom washing over her. The victory was sweet, but it wasn't bitter. Serena's betrayal, though painful, had inadvertently revealed Eleanor's true strength to Daniel, solidifying a bond that manipulation could never truly break. "No more rented furniture," Eleanor declared, gesturing around the apartment. "Let's go shopping, something truly us, something that says home again." Daniel nodded, a genuine smile on his face. They would fill the apartment with new memories, new love, and a renewed respect. The old pauper, as Serena had called me, was doing just fine.